This podcast is part of the How We Are network. For information on this episode and many other like-minded shows, visit howweare.org. That's HOWWEARE.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2014 and another million episodes from 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I am your humble host, Ray Harkins, and this is a very reflective time of the year. You know, everyone's kind of waking up from their holiday slumber and get back in the swing of things. I am actually on vacation right now. I'm in Maui. It's beautiful, obviously. I mean, if you've ever been to Maui. And this is my first time here. I always tend to go on a little family vacation at the beginning of the year, and it always kind of randomly ends up being Hawaii. So yeah, go to Hawaii. I guess I don't really need to recommend that, but there's so much stuff I want to talk to you about. But first and foremost, let's talk about our guest, Elgin James. He is a filmmaker, and he is also a founding member of a lot of hardcore bands within the Boston scene. Played in Righteous Jams, played in 454 Big Block, and then a bunch of other stuff that you will come to find out in the interview that I did. I met up with him at his house in the Silver Lake, Los Feliz area in California, and I've known the guy for a while, and contrary to a lot of people's opinions in regards to the fact that it's like, oh, wow, Elgin James started FSU, and he's a gang member, and he comes with a lot of baggage attached to him in regards to that. I have never known any other side of him beyond just being an awesome dude. I've worked with him professionally when I worked with his old band Righteous Jams at a record label I used to work for. Yeah, he just was always so professional, so on top of things. And yeah, it's awesome to see him be able to grow past that sort of weird stage in his life and be able to be a very successful and independent filmmaker. So more on him in a minute. Let's talk about propertyofzach.com. They are our partners, and we love working with them, and we'll probably work with them until I decide not to do this anymore. But that's not coming anytime soon. So visit propertyofzach.com, find out about the latest and greatest in independent music, and you will become educated. That's what I do, and I recommend you do as well. Go to the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com. You can probably catch up. I think I'm posting a few things here and there in regards to people's year-end lists. I basically asked those previous guests of the show if they wanted to give me their year-end list, whether it's like top records, books, movies, or just things that happen in general. So yeah, visit the site. I try to post on a daily basis, just fun stuff I trip across on the internet. The download numbers have been spectacular. Like, it just seems that more and more people kind of come on board of the show and interact with me either via email or Twitter. And if you want to email the show, it's 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. And, you know, I'm getting like press releases and people pitching me on, hey, have this person on the show. So slowly becoming this very, very real thing. And I'm excited about it. I love that. And I love that you people are along on this journey, because I was about to say that's the only way that it continues, but that's not true. I'm doing this for free. I'm doing this out of just my own personal interest and satisfaction out of it. So, but anyways, what I'm trying to say is no matter where you've joined on this show's journey, thank you for continuing the journey with me. There's going to be some changes over the course of the next few months or so. I'm going to be bothering you in regards to other ideas, because, you know, the whole person-on-person interview format is obviously something that I think that this show is, you know, does well and it's fun, but I'm also interested in kind of doing these other segments, you know, maybe bringing in some of my previous guests on doing their own little bit on the show. So anyways, I'll be asking you for some things in the future, some opinions, and I want you to share that, because I really want this to be an open dialogue. I want this show to be obviously what you want. I'm not going to change it from what I want, but I love to hear what people feel is the most interesting thing. Like the year-end show that we just did, it's one of the most popular shows of the year. People love to hear the music that we listen to and just kind of the general camaraderie that I have with my friends. It's fun to get that feedback of like, yes, talk more about music and yeah, that sort of stuff. So yeah, without further ado, here's Elgin. I met at his house. We talked about a ton of different stuff. If you haven't checked out his movie Little Birds, I highly recommend it. He's doing a lot of great work in the filmmaking area of things, and it's just so exciting because over the course of the next, like I would say 5 to 10 years, he's going to be a name that you will see repeatedly coming up. Here's up.
I feel it inside. What you see is all me for far too long. You want it down in silence, mean the roles are reversed. That's how it tastes as your defeat. Differences, I'll stay on top with discipline, I'll prove you wrong.
I usually start these things off with just like my own first introduction to, kind of your musical output, that sort of thing. I mean, obviously it was like when we dealt with each other professionally. Yep. I mean, I heard your name just like as in most people do within hardcore, where it's just like, oh, Elgin, like, right. Like, yeah, Righteous Jams and that sort of stuff.
Oh, that dickhead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's funny you joke about that. Surprisingly, I never, know what, like, at least to me, it wasn't like Elgin and a quantifier. Like, right. Oh, Elgin, the worst dude ever. Right. Elgin, FSU. Elgin, like, whatever. There were things that, I mean, I learned about you as I obviously got to know you.
Right.
But, I mean, I'm glad that I got to know you in that context and just, like, obviously know you as a person rather than know you as an entity.
Right.
I mean, and I use that, and obviously it's such a microcosm of the hardcore world is not like, it's not like Jeff Bridges as an entity.
Exactly.
But, like,
I wish I was more like Jeff Bridges as an entity.
I mean, who doesn't? But the idea of obviously people getting to know you based on preconceived notions, like, for one, do you still battle that? And for two, is it one of those things that you're just, you obviously just choose to ignore it and hopefully people will get you at face value?
Yeah, exactly. It becomes definitely still hit with it all the time. But it's only because when people, we all have to, as humans, we have to give everything a shortcut. Mm-hmm. We figure, oh, this is black, this is white.
Right.
There's not a lot of room for gray in between, so I totally understand. And then as getting involved with, like, any sort of entertainment, it becomes even more, like, smaller. And as like, okay, this guy is that, or this guy is plucked from the gang world and is now this. You know what I mean? Everything becomes very simplified. But yeah, I deal with it. I think in the beginning, what was hard for me of trying to, it wasn't even like that much of it was a huge change to my life, my actions, but it wasn't really change to the core of who I am. But then you do the opposite of always trying to make everyone comfortable. Like, oh no, I'm not that guy. I'm this really nice guy, And then also have to like kind of grow out of that too and just be comfortable in your own skin.
Right. In a way, I'm sure you felt like you were having to, just accentuate this niceness, or like pandering in a way, where you were just like, hey, I'm Elgin, I'm enthusiastic, like,
exactly,
I'm cool.
Yeah, and that's what it was like when you're especially first getting into this industry, into the film industry. For one, there's such this fake macho thing, like in Hollywood. That's like what it operates on, this kind of male-dominated world, and so that's what they're expecting. And I have no interest in that whatsoever.
Right.
But I was trying to convince people to let me make this movie about two 15-year-old girls. You know what I mean? So I still deal with it all the time. Like, people still, they expect to see like a gang member walk up, and then you have it, and so then they see you, and I'm just like, hey man, that's cool. Let's make a movie. This is awesome. And they're just like, that dude's not a real gang member. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, it goes back and forth between the two.
Your quote unquote credibility as this other entity that you're known for gets discredited. Like, you're just like, oh, that's not a person. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, that's stuff that like pretty much shaped who he was as a person. Like, oh, I don't even believe that's real.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. And I remember having this, and the time when it actually stopped, the whole kind of like trying to quantify myself, was I had this interview with a major newspaper. This obviously wasn't about. It was about the film and about the Sundance Labs. And basically the biggest newspaper in the world. I'm not going to call them out directly.
Sure.
But, and I had, we meet with this guy. We meet at Fred 62. So Los Feliz, right?
Right.
And, so we're hanging out. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm trying to show him my world that because Juno and I spent 2 years in Fred 62 basically, like, making our movie, talking about our movie, daydreaming about the things we were going to do, and becoming, like, best friends, becoming, like, blood and family.
Right.
Juno Temple, who's in, Little Birds. And so I bring this guy there, and I'm having like, a soy drink. I'm just doing all this stuff. I'm just so excited to talk to him. I'm trying to relate to growing up punk rock in a small farm town like I did.
Right.
And he'd grown up gay in a small town, like somewhere in the Midwest. So I'm like, that's the same. I'm like totally correlating these two things and totally connecting with him. And then when the article came out, and I left like, that's awesome. What a great guy. Like, we totally bonded.
Yeah.
And then the article comes out, and it's totally like, I don't believe this guy did this. I don't believe this guy. You know, all this stuff like that. Well, it's like, well, then you probably just should have read my FBI affidavit and stuff like that. As opposed to, like, here I am trying to, like, bomb, this is great, man. And then it was totally, like, the most snarky, like, and I was really upset about it. I'm like, yo, I'm like, and I talked to Michelle Satter, who's one of the people who discovered me with Robert Redford afterwards. And I was just like, I can't believe this. Like, this guy was like, you know, totally not even just discredits, like, you know, this, you know, whatever. Like, just as a human being to a human being, you're trying to open up, and then having just like basically be so snarky to you afterwards. Right. And so it's like, well, I'm just gonna, you know, you just want to close back up of like, yo, fuck that dude.
Of course, yeah.
But and then she was just like, no, man, that's a whole thing with, you know, whether it's doing music, whether it's doing film, whether it's doing anything, man, is you just need to stay open, and things are gonna fall as they fall. You know what I mean? But you just gotta stay like on your own path.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
That was the last time.
I like. I mean, the way that is because it's like, or at least the way I see it, where it's like, obviously, if you're consistent in who you are and like the way that you present yourself, it will eventually, obviously, outweigh whatever preconceived notions that people may have or like agendas. Because he, like,
that's right.
In writing that piece on you, he probably had 90% of it done.
100%, totally. You're totally right. We'd even talked about, and I joked about how other people when they've done articles have just gone to the Wikipedia page, which is just, you know, obviously all bullshit. Anyone can say it. Like, and I laughed. I'm like, well, hopefully you don't go to it when, you know, someone has wiped it out and it just says like Elgin James sucks or something.
Right.
And then I swear to God, because we didn't touch about anything in the past or any of that stuff like that. And then in the article, he literally had just gone to the Wikipedia page and like cut and pasted stuff.
So depressing.
And there's another time with not to go off on this.
No, it's fine.
There's another thing where there is this movie that I loved, and it was about war and it was about battle. And I got to sit down with the screenwriter from it, and I was so excited. Yeah. And I was totally just like, oh my God, I'm here with you. I'm not worthy. And he's just, you know, kind of like, again, this kind of wannabe macho, like Hollywood thing, like cigar and like the whole deal. And he was just making me sing and dance like the first like 10, 15 minutes. It was just like, I read all about you. Like, I don't like you. Like this whole thing. And I was just like, oh no, I'm just like an artist, man. You know, I'm just like this. And because this was really, really early on. This is like when I first went, basically first had just written my first script. Sure. And then it was so funny. And this guy, had written about war, had never been to war, had never done these things. He just lived on this whole Hollywood masculine thing. Right. And it was later, and I was so excited when I finally got his, like, oh yeah, you're one of the guys. Like, this is great. You should come down to poker night, which is like, sounds like a nightmare to me. A bunch of middle-aged dudes smoking cigars and playing poker. I'd never do it. Sign me up. Yeah, exactly. And, but after it, I was just sort of like, oh man, like, okay, now that guy likes me. You know, I mean, that guy, now I'm totally accepted. And like, and then it's funny to go through this cycle, then get into the industry, like go through the whole battle of getting a film made, getting beaten up and destroyed through that process because it is hell. It is like going to war. Right. And, you know, then going to prison. And I literally had just gone out of prison and I'd gone out to eat with my wife. And she works in Beverly Hills. And so we just happened to go to some fancy place in Beverly Hills. And literally I was like a week and a half out of prison, still incarcerated in a halfway house. I was just on a pass. Right. And then I see this dude, and he's there with like 3 other screenwriters, and then they're with like Antonio Banderas or something like that. Dude, I'm sure he's a great guy, but this sort of like, again, this whole fake Hollywood thing, all smoking cigars at this outdoor Beverly Hills patio. Right. And I'm like, that's it. That's like Hollywood like in a nutshell.
Yeah. Like that is a total snapshot.
That is a total snapshot of that, and I can't believe that. Just 3 years ago, I was like, oh my God, please accept me. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a bad guy. Yeah. I'm not a bad guy. Then it's just like, oh my God, all this stuff is just so much. I mean, so much of the world, it's not even this industry, it's just built on artifice.
Oh, cool. Oh, totally. To back things up, like, obviously, like, as we were, as you were hitting on your movies and obviously how you got started and stuff like that, but you were born and raised. Were you always East Coast? I can't remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, always East Coast. I grew up originally in this little farm. I was born originally in New York. And all that stuff is, I was like in the city, and then I grew up on a farm, in rural New England. Okay. That's where I spent the majority of my life. Kind of like, probably no one knows where like the biggest thing to us was a city called Waterbury, Connecticut. Okay, which is most people have never heard of, and it's probably just this old, depressing like mill town. Yeah, which we thought was awesome. I was like the big city, and I lived a half hour away from that, like further into the woods.
I definitely played a show in Waterbury, Connecticut.
Did you really?
Before, so that's
awesome.
Yeah. You describing that, it's like, oh yeah, that just brought back that flood of memory of being like, oh yeah, that is kind of like a old depressed town. Like totally. You can tell the industry left.
Yep, exactly. exactly. And then so the town I grew up was like a farm town, and we're kind of like a half hour away from that.
Why the rural community? Like, was it
because the people who adopted me and became my parents?
Sure.
They've been civil rights activists and hippies and stuff, and they kind of had this ideal. My dad was from Louisiana, and he was a minister, and they had this ideal of going, because now the 60s were over, and it's the 70s, of going to like rural New England and like having a farm and like going back to the earth and stuff, and like. So that's where we grew up, and then reality comes in. It's like, oh wow, this is really expensive, and we can't afford this. And like they had a big crop of marijuana, like in our backyard, which is funny. They're good at growing that, not much about everything else. But I grew up with like pigs and sheep and everything else.
The family structure that you had was it? Did you have like stepbrothers and sisters, or what? I don't even know.
Like adopted brothers and sisters.
Okay,
and stuff. I had like a couple foster brothers.
Okay, that's me. I was certain where I was like no.
Yeah. Yes, I had like foster brothers, and I had like 2 like adopted sisters. I was like the youngest out of everyone.
Okay, got it. And so so basically they just like grew marijuana, and that's like how they made their living?
No, my dad was a minister. He was like a pastoral counselor.
Oh, okay.
So I guess you counsel like pastors or people like in
Yeah.
So I mean, we'd go to like the nunneries and stuff like that. And
sure.
Like to work with the nuns, even though he was wasn't Catholic. But work with priests and nuns and stuff. And my mom worked in the factory. There's a big factory there called Torrington Factory. So
okay.
Basically, everyone in the family like worked at the factory.
Got
it.
A
small factory, poor little town.
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't trying to paint your parents as drug dealers, but I was just. So they've been living on something marijuana.
Yeah, so it would be so much cooler.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, it's not without precedent, because obviously it's like you do hear of people where it's just like, oh yeah, they just kind of get their own little crop of land, and then they just have their own marijuana plants.
Totally, exactly. Yeah. No, it was like rural New England and not Humboldt County.
Right. Yeah, not Weed, California.
Yeah, exactly. We'd been much better off if they'd done that instead of a factory.
And so was it one of those things, like, obviously, as when was it revealed to you that it was like, oh hey, you were adopted? Like,
I always knew. Like I'd had memories of being like with other places and stuff like that. So I always knew growing up. And there was like straightforward.
What age were you adopted?
I don't know. I was still really young.
Yeah, it's probably under 5. Probably.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I always grew up knowing. And then also, they're white and I'm not.
Right.
So that helped. Yeah. Being like mixed race. And I had a sister who was mixed race as well.
Oh, okay.
And who's, much older than me. My parents had gotten her they basically had to smuggle her out of Missouri because she was like a product of a crime. So at the time it was illegal for, white people and black people to.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Fornicate, I guess would be the
right. Yeah.
legal word. So they basically had like an underground railroad to get her out of there, and they adopted her. So I had like a black, 2 black older foster brothers.
Wow, yeah. So basically, it was a total family of mutts, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's like
everyone just a rainbow coalition.
Yeah.
Kids,
that must combine with the fact that you were in a rural farming community. Like, was it just one of those things where it's like, it was normal to you, but I'm sure like to the outside world.
Oh yeah, it was not normal exactly. And they were all way older than me, so it was different. And I think even my older foster brother, he was probably like 10 or so. He's like way older than I. And he's the one who, I discovered punk rock through. So he was kind of like, and he was like straight black. He was West Indian.
Wow.
So he was kind of like, and there was a bunch of skater kids at the time, like in this little town. And so they had this little punk rock band.
Okay.
And so he was kind of like, every scene that sounds terrible, being mixed race, I'd say every time I was like, oh, they're a token black kid.
Of
That's
course.
Like punk rock and hardcore.
Right, yeah. Totally.
And if you're lucky, you live in a city, maybe you have like a few dozen, but for the most part, it's just like, especially in this little area, it was just like my foster brother, Gladwin.
Right.
And so I had this punk rock band, and I wanted to be like them because it was so cool. So I was always like trying to figure out what's punk rock. I couldn't figure out what punk rock was. This was obviously pre-internet. I was always trying to figure it out. I was always trying to listen, and they wouldn't listen. He'd always listen to stuff on his headphones. So I couldn't hear anything.
Right.
It was really fun.
So you're, total epitome of a tag along. Just take me there. Can I listen to that?
Completely, yeah. And they had no interest in me whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah. They were not, like they opened up this world to me, but then, and it's funny because then as soon as I got into it, and then it totally like surpassed them.
Right.
Like, oh, cool. I love the Sex Pistols. Like, oh, the Sex Pistols and this and the Clash.
Yeah.
Then I was like, then I jump in. I'm like 12 years old. I'm like, what about Millions of Dead Cops? This is fucking awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Where's the raw shit?
Yeah, exactly. Where's Christ on Parade? Like, that stuff you're listening to.
Right. But I mean, it sounds like the environment that you were raised in was pretty loving, for lack of a better term.
Not in the house for sure.
Okay.
It definitely had its like, I mean, my mom was awesome. My mom was my mom.
She was the rock.
She was the rock, exactly.
Yeah.
She was learning how actually weak men really are and how we get to see children our whole lives. My dad was a really big guy. He was like 300 and something pounds. He's like a big, burly, big beard.
Yeah.
How everyone tries to look now. It's like my dad. Every hipster tries to look now is basically my dad. Yeah. But then realizing how he was still such a child. He had his temper and his anger and all these other things that kind of like everyone was so fearful in the house. Mm-hmm. Then he realized it was like my mom. I went to the farm. We lost everything. We went losing the house. But it was like my dad was off God knows where. It was my mom when we didn't have enough grain to like feed the sheep, and the sheep died, and we didn't even know until years later because my mom, who weighed like 101 pounds, was out there with a shovel like burying in the winter, digging a grave for it like in the hard like ground. So that's where I was such like a super mama's boy. Like, my mom was rad. So there's lots of love in that way, and especially trying to protect from all the violence and everything else. And it was really really racist town.
Sure.
Being New England, I grew up getting called nigger all the time and darky and stuff. And there's like a story I always tell when I was like, I was like first or second grade and I was at school and everyone called me nigger.
Right.
And I had a big afro at the time. So even though like I'm like very light skinned, like people could even think I was like Italian or something like that. But I had a big old unruly afro and you live in this little town. I was like, oh, nigger.
Right.
And so and then I came home and I was, with my sisters were around or something. And I was just like to one of them like, yeah, you stupid nigger. And my mom's like,
yeah. Record off the needle.
Yeah, totally.
What?
And she's like, where'd you hear that? I'm like, I just thought it was like this great burn.
Yeah.
Like, you jerk. I'm like, you nigger. And I had like a mixed race sister and a white sister, and I called my white sister nigger because I didn't really understand it.
Yeah, of course.
And then it was explained to me what it meant. And I got called it every day. And then that's when my fighting career started.
Right. And that's when you're like, I take offense to that.
Yes, I'm going to look this into a different viewpoint now.
Yeah.
And that's really that's where punk rock came in, is because I grew up, again, being called nigger, being totally the outcast. Right. And not feeling comfortable anymore. And even the kids, my older siblings, for some reason had a much easier time. I don't know what it was. But then I went from being, that's why I got into punk rock really young, and I wanted to know what my brother was listening to, what these kids are all about. Right. And then when I discovered it for myself, and I was 12 or 13, I think, first had my mom shave my head into a mohawk. And suddenly it was like, now you hate me because I'm punk rock instead of because I'm dark skinned. Right. It became very much this quick turn of
that's really, so it's like you felt in a way that you could take ownership of the like sort of outcast nature.
That's exactly right. It's a great way to put it. It's exactly right. And I felt so bad for my mom, who's like this, beautiful petite like white woman having to walk around with me. Like I felt embarrassed for her when I was a little kid because I was like, I feel so dirty. I'm
right. You're like, I know something's wrong with me.
I know something's wrong. Everyone looks at you, and as soon as someone's in, now I started to understand as I got older why everyone would stare at us all the time. Mm-hmm. This is before Sandra Bullock and Charlize Theron and Us Weekly with their dark-skinned kids.
Exactly.
So, so I always feel this shame, and I always feel so bad for my mom. Yeah. And she obviously was never embarrassed of me. No, right, until I had a mohawk. You know what I mean? Like a big swastika with an X suit on my shirt. Then all of a sudden, maybe she's a little embarrassed about it.
Right, then she's like, you need to calm down.
Yeah, exactly. But then I was like, oh no, this is why they're staring at us.
So many things that got put on your shoulders that obviously like you couldn't control. But then, when you feel, because I mean that age is obviously so important. Because you don't feel in control of anything. That's like, right. You're told to go to school, you're told to, whatever, clean up the house, clean up your room, whatever. But then, like, when you feel like you can take just that little nugget of, like, ownership.
That's right.
Then that's when it's like, you can shift it. You can, at least it helps your, young brain shift some perspective towards, like, okay, like, this isn't manageable, but this is.
That's exactly right. And that's true. I think that's our whole, especially when you're younger, but I think our whole lives we're trying to look for control in some way. That's why people go to religion. That's why some people have OCD. That's why some people knock on wood, trying to figure out some sort of control. And that's why when you're a kid, you're right, and it comes out because it's even more so because everything is still so new and raw and painful. Yeah. And that's why people cut themselves. That's why people do other things like that because it's one thing that you can actually control.
Right. Did you, like you said, you just basically, you started to react with people calling you names with your fists. Like, do you attribute that as a product to the fact that there was obviously, like, you already witnessed violence through your father?
Home. Yeah. I think that you just learn how to deal with things, definitely. Right. And it's funny because my dad was a pacifist, but there was always something I have, especially being older. Yeah. in being a man and understanding my father now, like I have, and he's passed away, and I got to make peace with him by the end. Because my mom was my mom, and on Father's Day, I would like give her a Father's Day card and not him, because she raised me. Like,
Right. Yeah, you're like, all the credit goes to you.
Goes to her, exactly. Anything, and still to this day, man, anything that's good about me that anyone like thinks has worth is from my mom. Completely.
Right.
But so now, not to disparage my father, because I made peace with him because my mom actually wanted me to. Yeah. So I understand his the struggles that he had. But yeah, learning how to, and he was a pacifist, but that was something that he afforded to the rest of the world. And that's why I always had such a problem with nonviolence and pacifism growing up. Because I'm like, what a fucking crock, because that dude was punching me in the face. But there, he's like,
That's so interesting, because it's like, like you were talking about earlier, there's like an artifice that is created, but then it's like when, you experience it, when it's like, oh, well, at home, like, there's so much bad shit happening, but yet you're illustrating this out. Yeah,
exactly. You're talking about...
It's a contradiction in terms.
Totally. You're talking about Martin Luther King and Christ and Gandhi turning the other cheek.
Yeah.
And then, my cheek still hurts from getting punched on the way here to your service.
Right. So that's why you obviously react like that was just a natural progression of like, well, this is the environment, so I'm going to...
Exactly. And it wasn't, and it was not successful, because everyone was like, I was a really small kid.
Yeah.
So it was. I started fighting back, but it was not successful until for another many years.
Right. You had to put your practice in for a while.
Yeah, exactly. I did. I had to pay my dues, especially when it seemed to be always the oldest and biggest kids ever calling you.
Right.
Names, and you're like 8 years old.
Right. You're like, I'll try this, and I'll get the crap kicked out of it
again. And again. It wasn't until luckily I went to, and it was a stir change when I got locked up when I was 13. Mm-hmm. And then you get a lot more practice, because then it's happening every day,
right.
But it's like a 10,000 hours.
Of course, it's 10,000. Yeah.
And but then all of a sudden I realized really quickly, it's like, holy shit! It's like, if I punch you first, if I hit you with an inanimate object, I win. It's that simple. It doesn't matter that I'm someone smaller than you. And then that broke something completely else different in my brain.
Yeah, there's like, I can level the playing field.
Yeah, exactly. I can level the playing field by picking up this chair and smashing you across the face with it.
Right. Not much you could say from the floor being knocked down.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when I started to get it a little more, as opposed to like the Wild West of like, let's put our dukes up by the flagpole.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how you learn it. You learn it from the world around you. And just being a kid, it's like, you want someone to protect you. You want someone to save you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you can't. Every kid is their own island. You know what I mean? You're your own island, and you're in the middle of a fucking war.
Yeah.
You just put out to sea on a little raft, and things can get rough, and there's lots of sharks and fucking everything else.
Yeah.
So, and I remember watching on TV, it was like a 60-minute special, and it was in Chicago, and the Ku Klux Klan had that rally there.
Oh, sure.
And there's all these people, and I was like, because the Klan was huge in Connecticut, like in the 80s, in the 70s and the 80s. It was like actually really big there. The Grand Wizard Dragon actually lived somewhere in Connecticut at the time.
Oh, wow.
And they had been decimated by, not to do this whole history, but Morris Dees, who's one of my heroes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, they basically decimated the Klan in the South, and then it moved to the Northeast.
The Northeast, okay, yeah.
And so there was always Klan in like even in our grammar school and stuff like that. There'd always be stuff like either scratching the walls, there'd be cards hung out. And there's this one kid in our town who was in the Klan. He was very like this stoner kid.
Yeah.
And a farmer kid who was very proud of it. So you'd always see stuff everywhere, and they'd march in Torrington, Connecticut, which is where my mom's factory was.
Oh, okay.
Where we'd go when I would go sit during the summer. I would go just hang out in the car for like her 8-hour shift to do something like that, because I was couldn't afford daycare or anything.
Right.
So when I'm watching this, I grew up terrified of the Klan. Like, they were the fucking boogeymen to me completely, and I had nightmares of them. I was like, I don't know how old I was, probably like 9 or something, like 8 or 9, and saw it on TV, and all of a sudden there's all these people there throwing rocks and bricks at the Klan. And there's this one thing, someone had fallen, and this kid had, this person who was white had this bandana over their face and like stomping on this fallen Klan member. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's amazing. Like, where are they? Like, I want them to, come save me.
Right.
And I remember my father talking about it, like, violence is no way to handle this. Like, what are they, this is disgusting. They're just as bad. And to me, I was like, oh my God, that's like, those are saviors. Like, I wish they were there every day when I get off the school bus. And this farmer kid I'm talking about would always be in his pickup truck because he'd pick up his little sister from grammar school. And so I'd go and I'd get off the school bus in a little, town, and we didn't even have like an address. Like our town is so small.
Oh, sure.
You just put your name on it, and it was like Candleburst Farm, and that was like your address.
Right.
And there wasn't a street name; it was just like a route, like a rural route.
Right.
And I'd get off, and the pickup truck would be there, and every day he'd throw his trash on me or spit at me and be like, die nigger, you and your whole Jew family, like all that shit.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, damn, where were they?
Right, yeah.
About 3 o'clock tomorrow, afternoon, I'm
could you be here?
Could you be here?
I just need like maybe 2, maybe 3 of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You never want to feel like you're, a victim of your environment because you obviously feel like you do have some sense of control of making a choice, but it's just like, when you're completely inundated with it, it's like, it's easy to understand why that is your reaction. And you see something that is so powerful as far as like taking something back from something that is like clearly so wrong.
Right.
Like, and that like the vision of, the Ku Klux Klan being stomped out by violence. So like, well, yeah, why is that wrong? Like, that's great.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's like, I can't believe, I see with kids, I mean, this is kind of a leap, but it's emotionally it felt the same. Mm-hmm. When Osama bin Laden was finally killed, and when you see all these kids, celebrating and dancing on the White House lawn and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was with friends, and they're just like, "Oh man, that's so fucked up." And I'm like, just like partying. I'm like, no, like that generation right there, these kids who are like 18 years old, were children when that happened with 9/11. That is a boogeyman, and someone just killed the boogeyman.
Of course,
And that's how I felt as a kid of seeing that on 60 Minutes. I think it was whatever program it was, in 2020, and just being like, holy shit, someone is slaying the boogeyman right now.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I am witnessing this.
Yeah.
As you started to, become more immersed in music, and obviously, like, I presume, like, school for you was just one of those things where it's like, you just you didn't put much time and effort into the actual, like...
Oh, no, I was
just skated by.
So I jumped a year early, so I was like a year younger than everyone.
Oh, okay.
I was little, and then I just, like, failed for the rest of my... career. I hated school. It was absolutely like horrendous. And you just wait, especially as you get older, and you just wait, and there's this club called the Anthrax that we'd all go to in Stanford. Yeah. And we'd just be like fucking waiting for the hours to go by, and it's a secret that you had and that no one else had. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
So I think with a lot of kids into punk rock, especially at the time, again, like pre-internet and pre this world where everyone kind of knows about it, just becomes this like amazing secret. When you show up Monday, and everyone else just at a keg party, and you're like covered in bruises and a black eye, but had the bad, like, what the hell did you do? I'm like, it was the most amazing show.
Right. So, yeah, so the music had basically consumed you by that point. And like, did you have an inkling that you wanted to like play and perform in bands at that point?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes back to when we talked about it in the P to 2 thing, like becoming, I became a vegetarian before I even knew what the word was.
Of course.
And I was like 7 years old. I didn't really perfect it because then you keep learning everything. Like, oh fuck, marshmallows, really? You know what I mean? Jello. Yeah. As a kid, I only ate like, Cheerios, hot dogs, marshmallows, and Jello. Right. And then all I got left with was like Cheerios, But yeah, so, but then all of a sudden you get, I find this, I'm into punk rock, this is amazing, this whole world is open up to me. Mm-hmm. And then I get the 7-inch Chicken Squawk from MDC, and I'm just like, holy shit. I'm like, this is everything that I think. And these people think this too? Like, I didn't even know this.
Right.
It was like amazing though. Like, never mind already I've found this world that you feel so encapsulated in. Especially before you're part of the scene. Mm-hmm. Especially before you're part of all the politics and who's cool and who's not and all that destroys everything because humans were just terrible people anyway. We ruin everything. Yeah. But when you're just imagining what it's like, and you're 12 years old and that's like, oh my God, this is fucking amazing. Right. So then you go to shows and then you're like, one good thing about being old is that I got to see Black Flags. And then you're there and it's like, holy shit, there's Henry Rollins, or there's Kira, the bass player, the biggest like crush on.
Yeah, of course.
And, or there's Kevin Seconds. There's, so it's very, everyone talks about all the time, but it's really too, it's like, holy shit, I can do this. Mm-hmm. So me and my friends who were just other farm kids from my school were just like, hey man, let's start this band. So we started our first band when I was 13. Right.
Did you have a guitar by that time?
No, I had a bass. Okay. That I got handed down from my brother Gladwin.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Guy in his band. Yeah, I don't know how. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I think I must have just stole. I mean, he must have been out of the house and I just stole from him.
Right.
That time. Yeah.
You're like, I'm gonna go ahead and borrow this for a minute.
Yeah. So I mean, started playing. You know, that's the great thing about punk rock is everyone can do it. And
of course.
And at this time, again, like I've always hated it's like every generation because we got it all the time. It's like, oh, your generation doesn't understand what it's really like.
Of course, right.
This generation is so much better. The only thing that's different that would happen later is when I was into punk rock and first started going to shows. It was like everyone either had been in an institution or had been in juvenile hall. Like everyone was a fuck up, you know. And there were also kids, who, maybe like 2 or 3, that had gone to college and had a fanzine and were like, "This is really great and positive." Right. And everyone else was just like a fucking derelict, like a dirtbag. And that was really great to find myself in that. Where it's really sketchy to go to a show. And then in the 90s, when that tried to be recreated, it was sketchy to go to a show because of all this faux gang, all that bullshit.
Yeah,
trying to recreate what was actually a bunch of crazy fucked up people who really needed medication or to be institutionalized.
Right.
You know, and then it became like, this is my crew, I'm going to smash you in the face. So it became very different. But in the 80s, like going to those shows, it was like...
As you graduated high school, did you graduate high school?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Was it basically like, all right, you're just getting thrown out in the world, like you are not going to go to college at all, you're just going to try to figure out, like...
And actually, it was funny because I did horribly in school.
Right.
And I was a total fuck up. Mm-hmm. And, and got locked up for a while, and then I was out, and then I was back in. I was just like really, Now this time, it was when I was 14 when I first got out of juvenile hall. And I came home, and I got into a fight with my father. Mm-hmm. It was the first time I ever struck back. And it was really weird, man. It was not like... in the movie version, be like, this is amazing, and like, yes, but it was totally like really animalistic. It was just like this. Something had happened. He'd shoved me back on the couch, and I'd stood up, and I was still really small. I was probably like 110 pounds, and he was 6'1", 300 something pounds. Shoved me back down, and I got up and I punched him in the face. Wow! And he fell back. He just was so surprised, and I just punched and kicked, and it was like this whole
opened something up,
and it was almost like if you've had the horror of having to see like animals fight. Sure. And it's like that afterwards, almost like vomiting.
Of course,
It's almost like that sort of thing. It was so animalistic. And instead, when I was little, I'd always be like my mom in the door of the room, my bedroom, like screaming at my father to stop hitting me.
Right.
Now she was in the doorway of this is in the living room, screaming at me to stop, kicking him and kicking him. But it broke something. It broke this seal. And he never raised his hand to me again. Or, you know what I mean? So it's like weird. It's like all of a sudden I've been trying to stop something, and then it did. And this is what worked for it. So this whole kind of thing became like unleashed. And
I mean, it's so interesting because it's like at that point, you would have no reason to not feel like that can settle everything.
Totally.
Like that.
Exactly right. The world, it's silly to say, but it's really true. And I lived my life by it up until a couple of years. Is like the world didn't stop kicking me until I started kicking back and harder. Yeah. You don't want something to happen, then just smash it out.
Right. Right.
And and that really is like, talk about might makes right. Like, okay, cool. Negative FX, I have that right here.
Right.
That's right. Might makes right.
Right. I was rewarded by doing this.
That's exactly. So that became very much of this also a cycle. And it's not even like explaining or justifying like that. That's just like the reality of the situation.
Of course.
This is what I learned. This is the positive feedback I got from it.
Yeah.
And I continued to make my own horrible life decisions after that.
Sure.
But this is how I was informed by it.
Right.
But it was when my mom had come to me, and she had been like, one of the reasons why they'd adopted me, she just lost a child.
Oh, okay.
So she was very much like, you were my second chance. She's just like, I was your second chance. She's like, you need to do better. Like, you're just going downhill, and you're going to like dead in the gutter. Like, you have to do something.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, cool. And that's probably literally what I said. Right. Okay, cool, Mom.
Thanks for pouring out your soul to me. Yeah. Right.
And then there's this thing called the Center for Creative Youth at Wesleyan University, where they take kids that are gifted, allegedly, and you go away to a summer program. Okay. And I went to that, and it was like so amazing because all some people were talking about art and writing and music and all this stuff. It was rad. Right. And I was like, holy shit, well, maybe I can. Like, maybe I will do this. Maybe I can turn my life around, even though I have like F's and D's. I'm only graduate or moving from thing to think because the teachers don't want me anymore.
Yeah.
So it became very much, holy shit, and that's when I discovered Morris Dees, who started the Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to be like that. Like, I'm going to be like a success story. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to go to college.
That's funny that you recognize, I can be a success story.
Totally.
I can come from this pretty unideal environment. And
totally. And I was so like, I'm going to become a lawyer. This is going to be amazing. Yeah. I just sounded like Harvey Levin on TMZ.
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's what I want to do. I want to become like this guy. This is my hero. And it's funny because I didn't think at all about my parents who are civil rights activists. You know what I mean? I was just like, this guy. I want to do it that way. I'm like, I want to kill my boogeyman myself. And this is the man who's done it. He's destroyed them, basically decimated them. And, something, unfortunately, you can't kill.
Right.
But, so anyway, so I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So I, obviously couldn't afford school.
Right.
And but I got to this Antioch University. It doesn't exist anymore. There's one out here. There's one in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where I could write this great essay of like, I was nothing, and then I have this is what I want to do. I know my grades are horrible.
Right.
I think my SATs were just like, horrendous.
Right.
So
like you got
bad.
your name right.
I got my name right. That's probably it. Hopefully I got that right.
Right.
So bad. Like, I should not be going to college.
Right.
And which everyone else agreed that I should not be going to college, except for Antioch University. It's a school where you don't have grades, where you can literally major in, like, ultimate frisbee. It was like
right. Okay. Yeah. For sure.
And so I was just like, this is, I got accepted there. It was awesome. It was amazing.
And that was in Ohio, you said?
That was in Ohio.
Okay, got it.
And so I went there when I was 17. I got in one semester. And then I came back home, and because of some violence and some stuff that I'd done before that I got involved with, that came back. Those chickens came back to roost, as they say.
Yes.
And I got jumped, and I got beaten, and I got left with brain damage. So that kind of derailed that whole success story. So you're very much like, I want to go out and slay the boogeyman. I want to take care of these like racist groups, and I want to do something.
Right.
Life, and again, it was my own doing of something, and I caused this.
Yeah, it's like you're not trying to paint this as like this tragic story, but just like, well, like I got fucked up because I did this other. Because I did this,
yes. Right. I took a rock and I smashed someone's face in. I caused this reconstructive surgery.
Yeah.
So then his much older, cousins and and friends came and they found me, and then they beat me with some sort of object. And it was baseball battle, who knows? Right. And I was left with brain damage. So I had trouble, left hemispheric brain damage. So I had trouble speaking. I had to relearn how to hold things with my right hand.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it was hard. It was like my tongue felt like a million miles thick. Yeah. And I couldn't keep any information. So I'd be sitting, and my best friend, my brother, I've always grown up with my brother, we're not blood related. Mm-hmm. So my best friend's name is Jocko. And he was in most of my punk rock, my bad teenage bands with. Sure. And so I'd be with my mom and I'd be like, where's Jocko? Where'd Jocko go? And she'd start to cry because I literally just asked her that 15 seconds before, but I had no memory of it. Yeah. And so I had to go through a bunch of occupational, therapy and physical therapy and stuff. So that derailed that. Right. So then me and my best friend ended up in Boston. We spent some time in Boston, ended up in Boston together. Mm-hmm. And that's where kind of the whole Boston era.
Of course, that's where all the, because you played 454 Big Block, correct? Yeah. And was that your first official sort of touring band where you?
I played in this band in Connecticut when I was a kid called Skeletal Ambitions. So we played and we toured. We went out with DRI. Oh, okay. And then I played in Force Reality, the Skinhead band.
Oh, sure.
Pete Morrissey's my best friend growing up in Waterbury. He actually grew up in Waterbury as opposed to me. Playing Waterbury, even though I lived 30 miles away. Right. It's just so funny how the world is. That, I moved the kid, Waterbury was the biggest thing.
Yeah,
and then you're out here in Los Angeles, have you heard of Waterbury? What?
What? Yeah. Oh, this is this cultural touchstone of mine. Yeah.
And so then Force Reality, and then that was very small. It was really bad as a bass player. Then I was in Wrecking Crew. Then Force Big Block.
Got it. And then, so basically, once you started to kind of integrate yourself within the Boston music scene, and it was just, you felt at home there as far as the scene was concerned?
Yeah, it was different. Being in Connecticut, it's different. Some people can go from, you're either a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan.
Oh, sure.
And Connecticut itself is really messed up, because when you think of Connecticut, you think of Darien, and you think of Fairfield County, or you think of Ray Capo, and you think today.
Right, of course, yeah.
And that was a whole very different world, and that world, it does exist, and it's all very rich, you know what I mean? But then there's also a whole lot of shit poor, part of Connecticut. And so you have a bunch of wild, crazy kids that you have nothing to do. You know what I mean? So you get into some crazy stuff. That's why the Anthrax is so amazing, because then you have all these, you have someone like Moby, again, from that whole kind of like Vatican Commandos, his band.
Yep.
And from these kind of like wealthy area, then have a bunch of crazy, wild kids from, whether it's New Haven or, so on and so forth.
Right.
But then you're kind of torn between, do you like New York or Boston? Mm-hmm. And so I'd see, and I loved Violent Children when I was a kid. Like, I loved Violent Children. I remember being at a show, it was at the Anthrax, it might have been the old art gallery, the very first one, I'm not sure, with the Mohawk and like, because I was it's to this day, like my favorite bands like Crass and Conflict and all that.
Got it.
And so I'm all geared up with all this stuff, you know what I mean? I'm like white out, like on my, jacket and stuff. And I couldn't even afford a leather jacket, so it was like some shitty like denim jacket from like Marshalls or something.
Right.
And walking by this group of like kids that are all like these healthy white fucking gleaming teeth smiles, you know what I mean?
Right.
And some of which, including, people that were in, Violent Children that would later be in Youth of Today.
Sure.
And all these kids were like varsity jackets and stuff. Like everyone that you hate in the real world now are at a show, and then someone's saying something about like my mohawk or something. It's this little kid. I was like a weird kid, like a fucking mixed race kid with a mohawk.
Sure.
And so I was like, that is everything I fucking hate.
Right.
So it was weird. So then you go, and then that kind of world, kind of fake, posy, whatever world, was very much also into New York and all that kind of stuff. And then you have, even though this was its own artifice and lie, at the time we did not realize, in the 80s, people from Boston would come down. Yeah. And I would see Choke smash people in the head with a fucking hockey stick, smashing himself in the head.
We need to make an impression from our town, and this is
that's what we're going to do.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then it'd be like, dudes like Wrecking Machine and Hank Pierce and all these dudes. And I'm just like, that's my kind of straight edge. It's not straight edge at the time, but like, that's my straight edge. It's not like give everyone a hug. I want to smash them in the face with a hockey stick because I'm better than you.
That city, as it's well documented, that city, like Boston and the scene, was obviously a complete response to all of that was existing.
Completely.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's such a blue collar town. It's a nasty, and I spent the majority of my life in Boston, more so even than rural Connecticut.
Right.
And although the thing about Boston is, though I spent 17 years like that, like I'll never be from Boston. Just the way it works. But even though I am from Boston,
right.
But you weren't born there, and you weren't born in like Brigham Women's and Children. You're not from Boston,
of course.
But looking at these guys like from Albertville and like just bands like SSD and stuff, it's like this real, actual like tough like working class like thing, as opposed to DC, which is great, and I love a lot of DC bands, and obviously everyone loves Minor Threat.
Of course.
But they're all people that had money. They're all people whose parents were in the government. They all come from money.
It was very intellectual. Even though it was aggressive, it was very intellectual in their approach.
Exactly. Exactly right. And there wasn't... and then, New York was just like its own thing. And New York is very much like, what's great about New York, it's very much like, hey, look at me, I'm from New York. Hey. And Boston is very much like the opposite of that.
Right. So you felt like, obviously, like you said, you spent a lot of time there. So you felt like you could just completely step into that scene, and obviously... Oh,
completely. And everyone knew, because because especially everything was centered around the Anthrax at that point, you know what I mean?
That's
We'd go to the channel, we'd go to CB's, to the matinees and stuff, so everyone kind of knew each other. From Choke put out a Force Reality record and stuff like that, so we knew him from that. And we knew a lot of Boston people. We knew like the Wrecking Crew guys, Eye for an Eye, and all those bands and stuff like that. So that just became like the logical choice, as opposed to totally. And just Boston, there's like that whole kind of underdog thing too, just like just against the world. Right.
And did you once you started to tour and obviously play in a lot of bands, was it one of those things like that you felt like that was your trajectory? You're like, I'm going to be, I'm going to tour. I'm going to do this thing, like as a musician, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that became like your whole world. Definitely, was touring and then coming home and eating shit. You know what I mean? And just having nothing. We were homeless for a lot when we first went there. We'd find an apartment and that would go to shit. We'd all just stay. And then also was the recession had happened at that time.
Right.
Excuse me. So it was all of a sudden you're in areas like the first place we lived. Was in this area called Symphony in Boston, which is actually really nice now. But at the time, there was like a park there. It was like all full of like crack dealers and hookers, and all these apartments were empty because no one owned them. Now the bank owned them, so you just like squat from place to place. But it was amazing because you're actually I'd been in New Haven when we were squatting in like basically like a hovel somewhere, like a shack basically. Same thing in Ohio, and. And then all of a sudden, you're like, we're squatting in this awesome 3-bedroom apartment, even though there's 40 of us. But,
right. But still, there's a roof overhead. There's room.
Yeah, it's amazing. And all the electricity got turned off. And my friend actually got the whole building shut down because there had been a gas leak, and he'd been freebasing on the 4th floor. We lived on the 2nd floor, and there's a flash fire in his apartment. And so he went outside onto the lip, onto the window ledge, and thought he had no choice, and dove off and ended up dying.
Oh my
killed
gosh.
himself jumping 4 stories. Even though the horror of it is that it was a flash fire, they actually could have walked this path and out the door, but he was also stoned out of his mind.
Totally.
But so that got the whole building shut down. So then I'm still there. I ended up being the last person in the building with like me and my 2 pit bulls at the time, like huddling for warmth. You know what I mean? Like no electricity, no water, no nothing.
Right.
And then it's like shit, time to go on tour. You know? So it's one that
it's just. I mean, it was this cycle of just like. You were just biding your time to when you
to get on the road. Exactly. Right. I always loved touring. Because then at that point, hopefully, you're going to be able to eat.
Yeah. You'll at least get maybe $5 a day.
Yeah,
where
exactly.
You'll be able to have something to eat, like
totally.
you said.
Totally.
And then because I mean, obviously, it's been well documented. And many people have written a lot of words about it. But then because to me, always the impression that I got in regards to obviously, like you said, labeled as a gang leader and the spirit, the spearheading the FSU crew. The word crew just always it's such a dirty name to me.
Yeah,
there's obviously so many negative connotations to it, but it's just like, to me, it always strikes me as like, okay, it's these, honestly, it's probably the same intention that like, Ian MacKaye had for Straight Edge, where it's like, okay, like it's you and 15 of your friends. We're just like, well, hey, there's this thing, like, let's like label ourselves as such. And then like, I mean, to me, like, it got so, I guess, big for lack of a better term, and it became such a thing that I'm sure it was like 100% distorted from what I guess maybe the original intention was. Like I don't know if that's something that like you are able to have perspective on now, or
No, completely, and that's exactly right. And what's funny about it is that I had distorted it from where it originally began, because it began as me and my best friend Bruce that moved. He was from Maine, and we moved to Boston together, and we basically went to Boston. Again, this has also been well documented. We were just like, we're going to make a name for ourselves. We had like these hammers that we always carry. We go to parties, and then we just beat everyone up with these hammers. We thought that was normal. We'd come from this other world that was so crazy.
Yeah.
New Haven, stuff was going on. New Haven was 1,000 times crazier than going on in this big city of Boston.
Right.
So we just figured, like, we're going to retire. We're out of that world. Our house has been shot up. We've done all this crazy stuff. We're, like, rescuing pit bulls and doing all this, dealing with all these, like, gangs at the time, like, urban gangs there. And then we're like, we're going to retire in the city of Boston. That was our way of retiring. We're going like, oh, there's a party? Cool. Well, let's bring our hammers and beat everyone up so everyone knows who we are.
Right.
And it was actually Bruce who discovered the FSU guys first, because FSU did exist.
Right.
And I remember seeing them all, and I'm like, what a bunch of, like, well-fed, big white kids. You know what I mean? Like, what are you guys angry about? Like, everything.
Yeah.
And it was different because we didn't have townies where I came from. It was pretty goodwill hunting. So you have these dudes that were from Southie and Brockton and these areas.
Right.
So then it was Bruce that got into it first and became very much. Again, and this is why I always hate, because it always has to be such simplified again.
Of course.
So he's going to write about it, and it's going to be in something. It's going to be like, okay, well, you were the leader, which was never true, because there was no leader. And everyone thinks that's like a legal thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I have no case going on. I'm done. There just never was a leader. You just like...
Right. You watch Sons of Anarchy, and it's like the idea, like, there's so... I mean, in its core, it's like, hardcore kids and punk kids, like, they're not organizers to begin with, in the sense of like, oh, here's this structure, this hierarchy, we're going to take minutes. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? And it's like, it's not even evolved enough to where it's like, you look at whatever, like, the Bloods or the Crips, and it's like, there's some level of organization there, because like...
There's money.
Right! And it's not like this, hey, we're going to shows and like beating people up, and it's like there's an organization behind that.
You're going to take like, across the country 400 alpha males and be like, oh yeah, I'm your leader. It's not going to work.
Yeah, that'll fly. Yeah. Right.
And I think originally the kids, and obviously it was like black kids and Latino kids then as well.
Right.
And then Bruce got involved and became very much like, Bruce was my brother, Bruce is my brother. So became very much like, dude, come on, that's not our thing. Like, I'm going to sing this band Wrecking Crew. We're done with all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, once Bruce has enemies, like, nope, that means they're my enemies too. And that's how I ended up becoming. I joined FSU after Bruce.
Right.
I couldn't do what I tried to do by being, I couldn't be Morris Dees in the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Right.
But let's do it this way.
Sure.
You know, let's smash Nazis. You know, and let's do this. And again, that's something that's been written so much about, and other people.
Yeah.
That's really true. That's what happened, and that's what united this group of kids. Even racist white kids, you know what I mean? Like my friends, because it was Boston, everyone's a fucking racist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even if you're black, you're racist.
Right.
You know, everything's different. And Boston is such a different city than anywhere else. It still surprises me. Boston is the only city, maybe in areas of Philadelphia is the same way, where white people aren't afraid of black people. You come to LA and it's straight like you go to the clubs in West Hollywood and there's like a black doorman.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh,
Better watch out.
Better watch out. Even in New York, it's like, oh, even though everyone's together,
Right.
but all the white people I know in New York don't actually have black friends. It's like
Of
a
course.
black hipster friend. It's still very much like, and Boston is like, it's not that way.
Right.
And, but I got derailed. So that's really became FSU, became this thing, well, what if we did this? And what if we were about doing this?
Right.
And it was always a struggle. So it's funny. So it kind of got distorted of like, again, just you want family and you want kids to hang out, and that's what these kids were doing.
Right.
And then Bruce and I came, and just because we just happened to be also very like people that probably should be medicated at least or institutionalized or imprisoned, which we both have been, brought it to this other level. You know what I mean? Because we're geared up to do this other stuff.
Of course. Well, it's like it's funny because it's like you hear. I mean, hearing the way you describe it, it's like you had ambitions outside of what you could potentially accomplish on your own,
right?
And you join that up with something that is, like we were joking about, like obviously loosely organized, but you're just like, well, we can maybe work together to kind of have this common goal, like to achieve this thing, and then be able to, work together to become, something larger than what I could have accomplished on my own.
Exactly, and still doing and being surprised and be like, holy shit, it wasn't intentional.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I'm on the path that I wanted to be on anyway. It's just a little bit different.
Right.
And there's just a lot more like bloodshed involved.
Of course, for sure.
Than being a lawyer, but still doing that. And then it's funny. There's always that kind of, and it always will because it's a bunch of hardcore kids.
Yeah.
So it always will be the thing of like there are dudes that were just straight bullies that wanted to beat people up.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then there are people that like myself that really wanted to do something and really believed in this thing. And and so it's funny, but you still have this. It's almost like having a family.
To a certain extent, you can obviously control who is labeling themselves as such, but
even that you can't.
No.
Spread out, right?
Right,
Show
exactly.
up in Germany and kids come out like that are repping FSU and stuff.
Right, and you're just and so like when did it? I guess you could joke around. Where I mean, it's no joking matter, but like when you went to jail, like that is obviously when it could become even more real. Oh my gosh, like this is so insanely out of control. At that juncture is when you were able to like gain some perspective, or was it even before that where you're just like oh my gosh, like this is so like
it's funny because it would grow and it would blossom and die so many times. You know what I mean? So it's like again, I'm trying not to, because it's always been, even when we've done. It's always a hard, it's a hard thing to talk about, not emotionally hard.
Of course.
It's hard to actually technically because, for one thing, I've always been like, well, talk about us, all of us.
Yeah.
And then that's the way to do. And then it's just like, oh shit, well, then you want to indict a bunch of other people. Then like, okay, well, I'll just talk about myself. And then that becomes like, oh, like you're trying to take all the credit?
Yeah. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah.
It became this very thing of just we blossom and die and come back. And there's, what FSU has its reputation for was really a time when there's probably about like 7 or 8 of us.
Right.
And that's really what set this tone and did all this stuff that has now become legendary.
Of course.
And it's still continuing, and obviously it still continues to this day. And so it's like a weird thing. It's like something, I had perspective on it only from a personal viewpoint. I had perspective on it when I would see it going a certain way.
Right.
And then try to reel it back from that way to go a different way.
Sure.
To go something more that I was interested in. And then I'd find like-minded people even late in the game, what I mean? Like, Joe Hardcore and the kids in Philly that were just like, became brothers to me. And that's, again, how FSU spread out and got bigger and bigger. You find these people that are like,
cut from the same cloth.
Cut from the same cloth, you know what I mean? And have like the same goal. So basically, have this fire and the fire continues on. To me personally, it became more about when I was like, when my mom got sick, and I remember a time when my mom came to Boston to visit me, and they'd gone to West Virginia and stuff. Mm-hmm. And when I was like, I think it was like around like 17 or something. At this point, she had left my dad I think she was around like 60 or something.
Okay.
And so she totally turned her life around. She just like left all this stuff behind. She's been working with like women in Appalachian Mountains, like teaching them how to take care of their children, and working with early childhood development. Completely like amazing, totally like self-made woman who changed her life. And she'd come to Boston to visit once, and I was so proud to take her around. And everywhere we went, and people would like be giving us free stuff, and it would be like saying hello. You know, we're around this like certain area, like in Mission Hill,
right?
You know, and I'm like, oh, my mom's gonna be like, I'm a success. My mom's gonna be so impressed,
right?
You know. And then we're walking back, and in a way, like only a mom can make everything sound lame. You know what I mean? She's just like, are you in the mafia? I'm like, what?
I'm sure that was like she's like, this is what happens in movies.
Yeah, exactly. This is what mom's like. What did like? But she could realize that it was not out of some sort of this guy's awesome. It was out of like, oh, cool, fear,
out of intimidation factor. Right?
Like, yeah, she totally being smart and totally picked up on that.
Wow.
And it wasn't until she got sick that became, and I got to spend the last few weeks with her like in the hospice, and apologizing. It was like now it's not like, oh yeah, well I play in these bands, I do this and this, you know. And there's also this romance about it, like, yeah, I'm a total, you know, I could do something else, but, you know, I have poetry tattooed on my arms, but instead I fucking do this and this, and I come home and I have to fucking scrub blood out of my fucking shoelaces. You know what I mean? I have this, and we're at war with the Hells Angels, suppose, and now we're at war with, like, you know, what's left of the mafia, and, like, all this kind of shit world, but then you're there and you're watching your mother die, and it's like, no, I'm just a fucking loser.
Right.
And I have given her nothing to be proud of.
Right.
At all. And again, like I always say, she's your mom, so she's proud that I could tie my shoes.
Of course, yeah. She's proud of you no matter what you do, but then like you started, the world opened up to where you felt the onus on yourself to be like, oh wait.
Yeah, oh wait, fuck, like I'm a loser.
All these things that are supposedly important aren't at all.
Like, and you're wrapped up in all this stuff, and each time there are times when you try to would change, and then something would
bring you back in. Yeah, of course.
There was a death of my friend Danny Edge, who I love, like a younger kid. He was kind of straddling both worlds at the time. There was, FSU obviously was not a straight edge gang.
Right.
There was a certain element of it that was straight edge. It was basically my group of people, and then again, like Joe Hardcore, much other people, and like in Chicago and so on. That was kind of like so it was an FSU straight edge, even though the whole thing wasn't straight edge.
Right.
But randomly enough, and I'll only, indict myself.
Yeah.
We're doing the most fucked up shit. The dudes that everyone FSU, they're just like a bunch of bullies, just beat people up.
Right.
Those dudes, all are good, guys that have a job.
Right.
They do this and this, and they get together and for the last. All the straight edge kids, we're the ones doing the most fucked up shit, because you're straight edge.
Right.
We don't drink. We gotta do something else. We gotta blow up the world somehow.
Sure.
So even then, and so I haven't watching kids at times, and I'm like, I'm gonna go do something else. I'm playing this all country band now. This is awesome.
Right.
And then seeing younger kids who have a foot straddle in both worlds of like, oh, I can hang out with you dudes and like awesome girls and have fun and be straight edge and do this stuff and break the law in other ways. Or there's this other biker influence to do this stuff again with people that I love, but just we're doing two different things, two different paths.
Right.
And then seeing them kind of fall between this crack that made me kind of try to, let's try to steer this thing towards this.
Sure.
And feel like there's always this thing of like, no one ever looked out for me. You know what I mean? Except for like when I was younger, it's like me, my friend Jocko, who I mentioned, and my friend Bruce. Right. And no one else gave a fuck about us. We created this whole world for us. And that's where FSU came from, the core of not what it was before we moved to Boston, but what it became was basically about like, Bruce has a problem, it's not his problem, it's my problem. If I have a problem, it's not my problem, it's Bruce's problem. And then you spread that out to people and further and further.
Right,
and that's the whole thing that you want to have, just to basically, because everyone's scared, you want to feel safe. And we're in a very scary world at the time. And all comes down to that, is just you want to feel safe.
Of course.
And, but then realizing that I built this whole life, but basically just piled it up on just a bunch of shit.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Of course.
And
that's something that because like all you're really doing at that time, and I mean everybody's guilty of this, no matter what it is that they're building. Like it's essentially just like a lot of busy work drama, whatever. And then you're just like, whoa, like wait, like this isn't actually like soul fulfilling. This isn't like scratching this itch that I feel like I need to get out. Like obviously, like how what you're obviously doing now with filmmaking, where it's just like that that was always inside of you. It was just a matter of like. You just neglected it.
Yeah, exactly. We all have this fire, and I just come up in prison all the time because the whole thing in prison is just I'd always hear all the time. It's just like you need to be humble. You need to be humble. That's what they hear because you want it. Like people can tell me I'm a piece of shit my whole life. Like fuck being humble. It's not like I think I'm better than most. I'm just gonna be the best that I can be. And be there's this whole routine that happens in prison, you know, and where I was in like, you know, this high security administrative thing. So he didn't walk outside for like a year. So we're always in top, and we're always there. It's like Whitey Bulger was there for a little bit, but he wasn't. I was in general population, obviously. He wasn't. But I was like, being from Boston, it was like, holy shit,
dude, fucking Whitey,
like Easter Bunny's here, you know. And then thinking about it, and then being like, holy shit, and really feeling this sense of like home, like Whitey Bulger is somewhere in this fucking building right now,
right,
and you know, getting a message to him and stuff. Then as it goes on, then realizing, no, Whitey Bulger's a piece of shit. Like Whitey Bulger destroyed people that I loved and families that I loved. And he's like a fucking, you know what I mean? So it's like really weird, this whole kind of thing. But then being back to the whole thing about always being humble, like the whole thing that your success if you don't go back to prison once you get out. And in California, there's, you know, recidivism rate, I have trouble saying that word. Is like, you know, 70-something%.
Right,
because people do go back. And also there's this routine you do where you try to take classes. So I would take drug education classes even though I'm straight edge, just to do something.
Right.
You know, because all my friends are basically Southsiders, which are like Mexican American dudes that are like mostly like gang members and stuff like that. Or like the prison system. There's like a whole different racial thing that we so, you know, it's like, hey, my friends, we go to these like drug education classes. And that all the counselors would be like, you know, you got to stay humble, you got to say this and this, you got to eat shit. I'm like, fuck that. Mm-hmm. I'm like, if Spider was like the best drug dealer where he grew up, just take that same fire you have, don't be fucking humble, and just turn it into something else. That's all I'm doing is like with filmmaking. I still have the same fire since I was a fucking kid. Right. And someone, you know, some fucking 13-year-old called me a nigger when I was 7 and me like swinging wildly and punching him and then getting fucking stomped out. Right. But that's still, you still have that, but then how do you do that? And I let it get fucking crazy. Right. And I found other like-minded people who are just as like unstable as I was. Of course. That became my family, people I still love. Right. You know, because, you know, I can't interact with anymore because I'm on parole. Right. But, you know, there's still people that are in my heart. Yeah. And, you know, we went and we set the world on fire in this way. And it became obviously this bigger thing than we thought and different than we thought. Of course. And it becomes really complicated when we're just like, oh, that person's a fucking asshole. Right. But that person's my brother. Right. And so he's totally he's being a bully now, because this whole thing was started because to fight against bullies. Right. You know, and then like, holy shit, that dude's being a bully. But then you get a complicated thing of like, but you're also my brother. And if you would promise my problem, everything becomes corrupt because humans are terrible. That's why the more there are of us in anything, the worse we are. Yeah. But
obviously, like as you got out of prison, and like, I mean, the fire for filmmaking existed prior to you.
Oh yeah. Right? Well, you know, it's funny. That was always my escape. Like, there's always reading all this stuff and filmmaking, like, again, which is, you know, been written about, but I had nervous tics when I was a kid, you know, I was so terrified of the world. The world was so fucked up. I was getting the shit kicked out of me all the time. I just wanted to keep my mom safe. I just wanted to fucking keep myself safe. And so I just, you know, I had crazy nervous tics. The only time I wouldn't have them was when I watched TV, you know, and it'd be like Planet of the Apes on a Sunday night movie, or Billy Jack, my favorite movie of all time. Right. You know? And that became my escape. It was my mom that realized, like, oh, like, you're not doing it. Like, nothing's happening. Like, when this, or when you're reading a book. Right. And then, you know, I got rid of the nervous tics because I just pushed that shit down even worse, deeper inside of me, you know. And then that's when the violence started and all this. But even when I was in Boston, I was talking, like, I'd be like, yo, Bruce, I gotta go see this girl. I'll be back. You know what I mean? And then I'd take off, and then I'd go to like the Coolidge Corner Theater or the Brattle Theater, and I'd go see like a Terrence Malick film. You know what I mean? Right. I didn't know anything about this world, but just that's what I wanted. I'd be the person, because I didn't want to go back to that world outside. Sure. And so, like I would say, like, I'd wait to the last credit. You know, I just want to stay in there. And so that film always meant something so much to me. And, like, you know, filmmakers like David Gordon Green, I always see them come out all the time. But it didn't seem like anything you could do. Unlike punk rock, where you could see that, and I could watch that band. I'm like, well, I could do that. I could listen to Christ on Parade and be like, I could do this. I was going to start my band just like this. Became like, that's a whole nother world. Like,
there are so many barriers to entry in regards to like, here's these gigantic gates that where am I supposed to walk through?
Totally, and then never realize there's millions of people trying to get in these gates. They can't even get to the front of the crowd. Right. So I never ever thought it would happen. I spent that time with my mom and apologizing, and then she basically was just like almost the same conversation she had when I was, you know, younger and getting out of juvenile hall the second time. And she was just like, you know, it's not too late. You can still do something. You still have like a second chance. Like, nothing's too late. I just met this girl that I'd started dating, and who had no interest in the world that I was in at all.
Right.
You know, and you know, she was like a punk rock kid, but she was like had no interest in FSU.
Yeah.
Like, oh, cool, here, like, let's go. And there's one evening that was like, oh, let's come down, we'll go see my boyfriend. You know, he's working, because we worked at all the clubs.
Sure.
We ran the clubs, and then someone that happens in the group happens to ironically be wearing a shirt that I had to call my friend Gibby in New York, like, yo, dude, is this a white power band? He's like, I don't know, man, they're kind of on the fence. Like, okay, cool, we'll stomp them out anyway. You know what I mean? And I think that's just normal. It's
right,
like,
better safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry. Some were
Right.
stomping out, you know, this and all these people, and then my girlfriend's like,
What are you doing? Yeah. What is this?
And but basically realizing like I had to do something, and having like, you know, John Cassavetes' picture on my wall, and like just basically fetishizing film, and it didn't happen right away. Like, I wish it happened right away, but I was just like, shit, I'm going to do something. She's like, let's go to LA. Why don't you like do movies? Want to do something? Like, my best friend Chad Gilbert was out here,
right?
Plays Newfound Glory, and we just had our it was like, I think it was like our 20th year of friendship or something like that. We just celebrated together.
That's awesome.
And he's always been, and it's funny putting out, you know, I put out with the film Little Birds, and it's really about me and Bruce. But then after doing it, I'm like, a lot of that is like, in a different way, is also about Chad and I, because Chad has always laughed. He's like my Allison. No matter what, he was always there for me. He has no interest in the stuff that I was doing,
right?
You know what I mean? But never judged.
Sure.
You know, and he would come to Boston to come like hang out, because his band would play. I'm like, oh, dude, this is great. Yeah, just hang out, and then there's going to be a riot. You know what I mean? This is going to happen, and chill out. You know, he has all these funny stories about it, but he was always like my brother. So there's one more touchstone I had out here.
Yeah.
Like, that's a positive energy I want to be around.
Sure.
So, yeah, long story short, we packed everything we had in 2006 into our van, my girlfriend and I, and then moved out here, and I'm like, I'm going to make movies. Then you get out here, and you're like, how the fuck?
Yeah, where do I? Yeah, what is this?
And just, again, it wasn't like burning any bridges. There wasn't any like, oh, well, putting that world behind me. Like, I'm above that.
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean? It's all part of like who you are.
Right.
And so I came out here. I'm going to try to figure it out. And then really quickly, a movie got made or got put together. It's supposed to be about my life. Because then all of a sudden, all these articles came out.
Of course. Yeah.
And it became like, oh, we're going to do this version. And you're going to be like, you started this gang with your best friend. And which is already wrong. So you guys started this gang. And you're like Robin Hood, and you did this and this, and there are definitely there's a version of that is true. Like, we did do these things. We did, you know, also give money to charity. We did fight drug dealers and rob drug dealers. All of these things are true. Right. But when you simplify that,
of course,
becomes this thing as opposed to all this ugly black poison that's in there as well.
Of course, yeah.
And where you're just as complicit. But I didn't know how to verbalize all this. All I knew is I would go to these meetings, and we'd sit there, and you'd go to all the studio heads. And Nick Cassavetes, you know, who is a really great guy, you know, Justin Timberlake was going to play me, which is fucking ridiculous, and Nick Cassavetes was going to direct it, and I had his picture of his dad on my wall, so I'm like, oh my god, this is it, like, you made it. Right. And then you're in these meetings with these writers, these two college-educated, smart guys, and they'd be like, oh, you know, then the end of the second act, like, Elgin's mom dies, you know, and everyone goes like, oh, you know, and I'm like, fuck, that's like my mom. That's my life. Like, that's real.
Yeah, that's not an anecdote.
That's not an anecdote, exactly. That's my fucking life that I just went through. Right. And then there's a thing about then his friend Danny dies and all this, and then, but I'd come home, and my wife and I, we had nothing. We didn't know anyone. You know what I mean? Yeah. We were both like, we were living off, I don't even know if she had a job yet as an assistant. We had nothing with no money. Right. And I was like, I need to do this for her. And then finally they wanted to make, which makes sense, they want to make my character white for Justin to play. Sure. And I'm like, well, why would this mixed race, why would this white kid start this gang against, you know?
What's his motivation?
What's his motivation?
Yeah.
And so I realized I knew more about story than everyone else that was there. So I walked away, and I decided, like, I'm going to write about, like, me and my best friend. And then I was like, how the hell do I do that? Right. Without doing the same things and glorifying this violence and glorifying all the stuff that I'm just getting away from. Sure. And then that's where the idea of, like, well, I'm going to make us, like, two 15-year-old girls. Because also two 15-year-old boys don't say anything, like I always say. We just be like, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no expression of emotion.
Exactly. Girls are so much more complicated, so much smarter, and that's how the whole thing came about. And by doing that, I lost everything. Like, I lost my agent. I lost anyone that was interested in me at the time. Right. And then just by, you know, finding the right people and the right mentors, and that's when Robert Redford came into my life and became like, this was the same with punk rock, of not taking the easy way out. I'm like, yo, I gotta go with my gut. Right. And it's not like, oh, I know my gut, this is right. I just know this makes me feel sick. Like this makes me feel like wrong, like I want to throw up. So that's wrong.
Right.
I got to go with this. I'm just going to express myself. I don't care if anyone ever sees this movie, or I don't care if it ever gets made. I have to get this out.
Right.
And then that's what you get rewarded for.
Right.
You know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think because it's funny because like you see, you know, this can kind of be the last train of thought, but like especially at this day and age, I mean, I truly believe, like, I mean, you can even reference the past, like maybe 5 years, I'd say. There's just been they want honesty in whatever art they're consuming, whether it's music, whether it's, you know, movies, TV, whatever. They like these singular visions that you can just like clearly tell have spawned from one, maybe two people.
Right.
And it's like that gets rewarded eventually. Whether whether you're 20, whether you're 60, like whatever, like the people, especially now, because people want that. You know, as we were talking about earlier, it's like you just want to have that experience. You want to have that connection where it's just like, oh, those thoughts that I have, like, oh, like other people can express them, like maybe more eloquently than me, and like in a beautiful manner. But it's like, yeah, that's perfect. That's all anybody is looking for, just that honesty and that currency. And I think people are now gravitating to it. But people like you said, like Robert Redford, all these people that are considered luminaries within the field have been doing it for years, and like unrewarded in some sense of the term.
Right, totally.
It's like now you're able to, now it's like that's why a movie like Little Birds can exist now, because the world is ready for that.
Yeah, and the whole point of it is just, to me, it's like even when I played in bands, even when I was in Righteous Jams, like our whole thing was always like, and Joey and I, Joey C, still one of my closest friends in the world, and my brother, and it would always be like, we're not playing, even though we were a cool kid band, you know what I mean, and we were like the popular kids, right? Both sides of the crew, or group. Right. But we weren't ever playing for them. We were playing for like the 14-year-old kids that we were, that everyone hated. Right. You know what I mean? And that you won't feel so alone in the world. And I've taken that same thing with film and tried to do the same thing with Little Birds. Because that's all, any kind, whether it's punk rock, music, hardcore, whatever, it can be just to not feel so alone in the world. Yeah. And that's a great thing about,
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, it's just great because it's like, you've obviously been able to take all the darkness that has, consumed a lot of portions of your life, and have been able to reinvent yourself, but still retain who you are, if that makes sense. Like, and
it's there, and you find people that are like, there's lots of all this other distraction stuff around there. There's dudes smoking cigars that make war movies that are actually, full of shit. Yeah, yeah. And then you find the right people. Then all of a sudden I'm making this movie with my best friend, Gino Temple, whose dad just happens to be Julian Temple, who's, first, when I saw, the great rock and roll swindle, or the record of Sex Pistols, basically the fifth Sex Pistol. Yeah. Like how, so when I finally met him, and then Julian Temple is at the premiere of Little Birds at Sundance, and I'm like, you completely fucked up my life because you got me into punk rock. Sex Pistols was the first band I ever got into. Right. But how amazing to come all the way. You think it's so different, but I'm actually in this also amazing spot with this person. And then to hear how they were just a bunch of fucked up kids in England. They would never think that some kid in the woods in fucking rural New England would be watching this or listening to this, and that would connect somehow. It's crazy. And also to realize the reality of it is also, it's not this pretty picture. It's not like what people see of like, oh, punk. I've also these people they were maniacs, and they're still maniacs. You know what I mean? This is a dude who's still fiercely fighting to get his films made. It's this very, very, this great insular, circular thing that you get rewarded just again by staying to your punk rock ethics and roots and your gut.
Well, thank you very much for obviously hanging out and fucking talking a bunch of shop.
Thanks, man. I love it.
So there you go. That was Elgin, and I could have talked to him for probably like 2 or 3 hours, but I had to respect his time. I'm not going to sit here and be like, hey, here we go, let's just do this marathon podcast. Yeah, great dude. Check out his stuff. Like I said, if you haven't seen his film Little Birds, you need to do so immediately. Yeah, it's just a great film. 100wordspodcast.com, propertyofzach.com. The editor, as always, is Tom Richfield. Just over the course of the next few weeks, let me just tease you. I'll just tease you with, because I don't even know if anybody listens to this part of the show, but here's some upcoming guests. I have Stephen Egerton, the drummer of Descendants, on the show. I have John Vigil from The Ghost Inside. I have Steve Brodsky from Cave In. Like, that's just over the course of the next month. Like, strap in. I got some awesome stuff coming. So, until next week, thank you, everybody. Be safe.